June 21st, 1991, 60 miles east of New Jersey's coastline, North Atlantic Ocean. At 6:14 a.m., the surface of the water is almost perfectly still. No wind, no waves. Just a flat grey mirror stretching to the horizon. Beneath it, 230 feet down, something waits. On the deck of a small research vessel named Sea Lion, River John Chatterton tightens the final strap on his twin oxygen tanks. His fingers are numb, despite his gloves. The Atlantic in early summer is never warm. Even in June, the water holds winter inside it. Beside him, Richie Kohler checks his depth gauge for the third time. 230, Richie mutters. No more than that. Any deeper and we're dead. John nods. He doesn't reply. He's staring at the ocean. They've been searching for this wreck for months. A blip on an old sonar scan, a shadow on a grainy chart. A rumor passed between commercial fishermen who kept snagging their nets on something massive below. No one knew what it was. Not a freighter, not a tanker, not a fishing vessel. Just something. At 6:19 a.m., the captain gives a short nod. Dive windows open. John steps to the edge. The air smells like diesel fuel and salt. Somewhere below, currents are moving like invisible rivers. The visibility will be poor. Maybe 10 feet, maybe less. He exhales once, then steps off. The ocean swallows him instantly. Cold punches through his wetsuit like a blade. The surface light vanishes within seconds. Blue fades to grey. Grey fades to black. By 40 feet, the world is gone. Only bubbles. Only breathing, only the steady click of instruments. At 80 feet, pressure wraps around his skull. At 100, his ears scream. At 150, nitrogen begins to whisper strange thoughts into his mind. Colors sharpen, sounds feel louder. Time stretches. At 200 feet, death is close enough to touch. Richie swims beside him, his flashlight cutting a narrow tunnel through the dark. They move slowly, carefully. Every movement costs oxygen. Every mistake costs life. The bottom should appear any moment now. Then, a shape. At first it looks like a cliff, a massive black wall rising out of nothing. John freezes mid-kick. He aims his light. Metal, rusted, scarred, covered in marine growth, but unmistakably metal. It stretches left. It stretches right. It disappears into darkness in both directions. This is big, Richie whispers into his regulator. John swims closer. The wall curves. Not like a ship's hull, like a cylinder, a perfect, terrifying cylinder. Then he sees it. A circular opening. A hatch. Riveted steel. German design. World War II design. John's heart slams against his ribs. No way, he breathes. They move forward together. The beam of John's flashlight sweeps downward and reveals the bow. A long, narrow nose. Torpedo tubes. 4 of them, arranged in a perfect row. John's stomach drops. It's a submarine. Not American, not British. German. A U-boat. 230 feet below the Atlantic, off the coast of New Jersey. Where no German submarine was ever supposed to be. They hover there, suspended in the dark, staring at it. The vessel is intact. No massive explosion, no shattered hull. No collapsed pressure sections. It lies on the seabed like it was gently placed there, as if someone parked it and walked away. This can't be real, Richie whispers. John swims along the side. The hull is covered in barnacles and coral, but beneath it the steel is still solid, still smooth. He reaches out, touches it. Cold metal, 70-year-old steel, still holding, still silent, still keeping its secrets. They follow the hull toward the tower. The conning tower rises like a tombstone. Periscope housing. Radio mast mounts. All there, all preserved. John's light sweeps across faded lettering. Something is painted beneath the grime. He wipes it gently with his glove. A letter appears. Then another. Then another. You, Richie says slowly. Boot. John feels his mouth go dry. They've found a Nazi submarine. In American waters, official records say this is impossible. Every German U-boat had been logged, tracked, sunk, destroyed, documented. There were no missing submarines, no ghosts, no unknown wrecks. And yet, here it is. They circle the tower. And then they see something that makes John's blood turn cold. The forward hatch, it is closed. Sealed. Locked from the inside. No blast marks, no external damage, no sign anyone ever tried to escape. Whatever happened to this crew? It happened inside. John checks his gauge. Oxygen is dropping fast. Decompression limits are approaching. They've stayed too long, way too long. Richie taps his arm. Time to go. Reluctantly, John pulls away. They begin their slow ascent, leaving the black shape behind. But as he rises, he keeps looking down, watching the submarine fade into darkness, watching history disappear again. He doesn't know it yet, but this wreck will take 6 years to identify. It will kill 3 men, and when its true identity is finally revealed, it will expose one of the strangest, most disturbing submarine mysteries of World War II. 230 feet below the Atlantic's churning surface, the cold presses in like an invisible fist, and the dark seems to stretch on forever. For a moment, Chatterton and Kohler just drift, motionless in the gloom, eyes fixed on the massive shape beneath them. Neither man speaks, not because they fear silence, but because silence feels right here, in this place that time forgot. They have seen wrecks before, freighters, tankers, rusted hulls, broken and pounded by decades of storms, but this is different. The vessel beneath them is unmistakable. A German submarine, steel, torpedo tubes, the unmistakable lines of a Kriegsmarine U-boat. Chatterton reaches out with a gloved hand and brushes a patch of hull. The metal is rough with incrustation, but the shape beneath is still clear, a conning tower, hatch intact. Marine life encrusting its lines like barnacled armor. "What the hell?" Richie murmurs into his regulator. The gas bubbles seem to float slower here, as if the ocean itself is hesitant to disturb the moment. "It shouldn't be here," John finally replies. Because, according to every known record the 2 men had studied, no German submarine should exist in these waters. Not here. Not after 1945. Yet here it lies. In American waters, where no U-boat had any business sinking or ever having been dispatched. For months afterward, the divers returned again and again. Each trip down was a slow, painstaking descent through freezing water. Instruments buzzing with depth alarms. Hearts pounding under the weight of cold and pressure. They brought back shards of pottery stamped with swastikas. They recovered metal parts stamped with German naval insignia. Little by little, the evidence piled up. This was a Nazi submarine, and it was perfectly preserved. But which submarine? No Allied records showed a U-boat sinking here. Norwegian naval logs, British Admiralty reports, German archives all pointed to the same conclusion. There should be no submarine at this location. When the team first discovered the wreck in September 1991, they didn't even know if it was American, German, or something else entirely, only that a massive steel ghost rested on the seabed. It was so bizarre that other divers began referring to it simply as U-2. The submarine whose identity was a mystery. The wreck lay motionless, silent, and unmoving like a riddle etched in rust. For 6 years, the divers devoted their lives to solving that riddle. Many returned with fragments and artifacts, each piece offering a new clue or a new false lead. The job was hazardous. They plunged over 200 feet without submersibles, relying only on scuba gear and careful calculations. Dives were limited to minutes, with slow and dangerous decompression, stops on the way back up. 3 divers died during those years, men lost to the unforgiving depths, to bubbles that failed to rise fast enough, to the crushing pressure of the deep. And all the while the submarine waited, silent, unclaimed, unexplained, like a secret the ocean didn't want to give up. Until a dinner knife changed everything. For weeks after that first dive, the wreck sat like a sleeping monster in their minds. They returned again and again, dropping through the cold blue to that eerie silhouette beneath the waves, sometimes just to confirm it was a submarine, sometimes to gather pieces of metal, fragments, anything that could explain what this thing was. They recovered German-marked items, naval china inscribed with Kriegsmarine insignia, parts of torpedo equipment stamped with unmistakable German markings, but nothing that conclusively proved which submarine this was. One artifact changed everything. It was a simple knife, a utility blade with a wooden handle, corroded by time and salt but still intact. Carved into the wood was a name, Horrifying. John Chatterton cradled it in his gloved hand. He could see the grain of the wood through the incrustation, could feel the weight of the possible identity it carried. They took that knife back to the surface and sent its image to authorities in London, who forwarded it to German naval historians. Only one man with that name was ever recorded lost aboard a German U-boat in World War II, Martin Horrifying. Funkmeister, radio operator on. As the team returned time after time in those long, cold New Jersey dives, the eerie silence of U-869's interior began to feel alive. Torches flickered off debris-strewn decks. Rusted wires dangled like frozen veins, and everywhere lay the remnants of a crew that had never walked away. Inside the control room and passageways, personal effects protruded from the silt. A boot here, a rusted buckle there. The science of wreck diving separates historians from voyeurism, and these divers felt that tension deeply with every descent. In time, the physical damage told a story the historical record never did. There were two distinct areas where the submarine's pressure hull was breached. Near the aft torpedo room, the steel was bent inward, pressure pounded as if struck by a massive external force, consistent with a depth charge pattern known from other U-boat sinkings. But the control room exhibited damage that didn't match anything the surface fleet could have inflicted. Divers documented broken bulkheads and massive splintered plates, torn from within, as if a violent force had detonated inside the hull. Parts of the interior ceiling in the forward sections twisted outward into the path of the passageway, suggesting a concussive disruption that radiated back and up instead of being pressed down from an enemy blast. Of course, depth charges from destroyer escorts like the USS Howard D. Crowe and the USS Coiner, which had been in the general area on 11 February 1945. It is now widely believed that contact between U-869 and those escorts led to the sub-S sinking, and that Allied action was the final blow. But the mystery didn't lie just in the sink. It lay in how the interior was ripped apart. Some researchers now propose a chilling possibility that one of U-869's own acoustic torpedoes, the late-war German T-5 model, designed to home in on enemy ships, may have malfunctioned, running a circular course and striking its own submarine. This wasn't pure speculation. Other cases of such circular runs were documented during the war. U-869 carried multiple torpedoes when she left Germany in late 1944, and acoustic homing weapons were notoriously finicky. If one had spun back toward the sub and detonated near the control room, it could have catastrophically damaged the hull where divers found the forward breach without any external mark on the much larger pressure hull plating. If true, this was the kind of horror few in the Kriegsmarine ever spoke about, a hunter destroyed by its own armament. Yet even this doesn't fully explain the pattern of damage. The control room wasn't just ruptured, it was torn. Sharp metal seams were bent outward into the cramped passageways where sailors once walked. Personal items lay strewn among the wreckage, a radio handset twisted into a corner, a mess tin cracked open as if dropped mid-meal. These weren't the signs of a quick, clean, fatal attack. They were signs of chaos, of panic, of a final moment that wasn't a disciplined combat loss, but a sudden internal catastrophe. Outside the wreck, on the ocean floor that had cradled U-869 for decades, the water was motionless. But inside that shell, the sea seemed to carry echoes of lives interrupted. Each dive down those 230 feet was like walking into a tomb. With the lights on, a tomb where history and horror were indistinguishable. History had given them a name. But the truth, what really happened on that cold February day in 1945, was still buried in the rust-eaten corridors of U-869, waiting for the next diver bold enough to peel back its secrets. Once the identity of the submarine was confirmed as U-869, The story shifted from mystery to historical reckoning. What the divers had uncovered was a U-boat that should just not have been where it was found. Official German and Allied records both placed U-869 lost thousands of miles away, just stage near the coast of North Africa or the Eastern Atlantic, long before it ever reached American waters. Yet the evidence recovered from the wreck told a different story. The turning point came with a simple artifact, a knife with the inscription of a crew member's name, Horenberg. When divers first penetrated parts of the interior, careful to respect that this was a war grave, they found a labyrinth of torn metal, scattered equipment and personal effects frozen in place. Once shining instruments were dulled and coated in decades of silt. Gauges pointed forever toward a moment that would never again change. Every passageway felt like a corridor into the past, where time had stopped with the lives of the men who served aboard. Unlike many U-boats sunk by clear external blast damage, U-869's internal environment was chaotic. The forward sections near the control room and crew quarters showed plates bent outward into passageways, suggesting explosive force from within, something that did not match the neat, directional blast patterns seen when depth charges strike a hull. This led to a controversial early theory that one of the late-war T-5 acoustic homing torpedoes U-869 carried may have malfunctioned, performing what submariners call a circular run, looping back to strike the boat that fired it. German engineers knew this was a real danger. Acoustic seekers could, if they missed their intended target, begin tracking the loudest engine sounds within range, including those of the firing submarine itself. But as more dives were made and damage examined, the evidence became more complex. There were multiple distinct breaches in the hull, rather than a single localized explosion. This fits better with the anti-submarine depth charge attacks from surface vessels, especially when combined with the knowledge that U-869 was likely detected and pursued by U.S. escort ships on February 11, 1945, the USS Howard D. Crowe and U.S. Coiner, both destroyer escorts operating in convoy waters, dropped patterns of depth charges and hedgehog projectiles that could inflict crushing damage over an area, exactly the kind that would result in multiple pressure breaches separated along the hull. Some dive researchers even speculate that is a combination of misfired torpedo and depth charges could have occurred. Perhaps a malfunctioning torpedo alerted escorts and prompted an aggressive counterattack, resulting in a violent final sequence. But no matter the cause, the wreck's interior remains a stark testament to how abruptly life aboard ended. Throughout the tour of the submarine's interior, the personal items left behind, mess kits, boots, even charts, reflect a crew caught unprepared for whatever struck them. In the cramped control room, a radio handset might be upside down on the floor, wedged among bent support beams, as though a sailor had dropped it mid-turn. What is most haunting about these objects isn't just that they were left behind. It is that they do not look arranged by time. They look abandoned in an instant. There were no signs of a disciplined evacuation. No indication the crew had a chance to respond or take action. Just frozen fragments suspended in the chilling silence of the Atlantic depths. And though the exact sequence of events remains a point of debate among historians and wreck divers, one fact remains clear. U-869 was not just another casualty of the Atlantic War. She was a ghostly anomaly, a submarine lost to history until divers uncovered her, and then a mystery that still challenges our understanding of submarine warfare and the fog of combat in World War II. The men who found U-869 didn't just uncover steel and artifacts, they found a war grave. Inside the wreck, skeletal remains and personal objects hinted at lives abruptly ended in the cold North Atlantic. The divers respected this solemn reality. They never disturbed remains and often refused to photograph locations where bones lay, honoring the dead in the way explorers must when standing amid a submerged cemetery of the vanished. The submarine's commander, Kapitänleutnant Helmut Neuerberg was a 27-year-old officer from Strasbourg when U-869 was commissioned on January 26, 1944. Under his command, the boat carried 56 men on her final patrol, all of whom perished when she was lost on February 11, 1945. The only survivor was Second Radio Officer Herbert Guszewski, who missed the patrol due to illness. For decades, historians believed U-869 had been sunk off Morocco or the mid-Atlantic, based on post-war assessments of Allied attacks. But the wreck Yates discovery near New Jersey forced researchers to conclude that the submarine never received orders, shifting her patrol to African waters, and instead remained in North Atlantic operational zones, ultimately sinking close to the U.S. coastline. The identification of the wreck was itself a triumph of persistence and cold water diving skill. After the initial 1991 discovery by Captain Bill Nagel and divers like John Chatterton and Richie Kohler, it took 6 years of repeated dives and the tragic loss of 3 divers. During the effort, before pieces of wreckage with serial numbers and engraved tags conclusively proved the sub-S identity as U-869 Indy. That proof came from a small but unmistakable clue, a tag from a parts box, and a knife inscribed with a crew member S name, tying the wreck forever to U-869 and to the sailors who had served aboard her. The depth of the site, about 230 feet, made this not just a dangerous discovery, but a technically demanding one, forcing divers to push the limits of scuba gear and decompression procedures. Once the identity was confirmed, the dive team and historians alike began piecing together how the accepted narrative of U-869's loss had been wrong for half a century. The location of the wreck clearly contradicted wartime and post-war naval sources that had placed her sinking thousands of miles away. Instead, the U-boat was found to have stayed in the Western Atlantic far longer than records indicated. But this discovery wasn't just about correcting maps. It was about humanizing, the names etched on long-forgotten lists. Families of the crew, many who had never known the fate of their loved ones, learned the truth decades later. Some seeing images or documentaries like PBS' Hitler's Lost Sub that brought U-869's story into the modern era. Those names, young sailors barely in their 20s, seasoned petty officers, and officers like Neuerberg, had once been ordinary men swept up in a global conflict. Their submarine, now a silent grave 230 feet beneath the Atlantic waves, stands as a stark reminder of the human cost of submarine warfare. Sudden, absolute, and eerily preserved beneath the sea where surface battles and strategic maneuvers fade into time. But even with identities restored and grave sites pinpointed, there remains a question that haunts historians and divers alike. What exactly happened below the surface on that final February day? Was it enemy depth charges that finished U-869? Or was it something internal, a catastrophic malfunction that detonated from within? The wreck's damage patterns suggest both possibilities. And while consensus leans toward engagement by American escorts leading to multiple hull breaches, the exact sequence of events may never be fully known. What is certain is that the submarine, once lost to history, now sits as an underwater monument to the 56 men who never returned. Their stories bound to steel, salt, and the cold silence of the deep. Once divers confirmed the identity of the wreck as U-869, a Type MySC-40 German U-boat, historians had to confront the fact that existing wartime documents were wrong about where and how this submarine was lost. Records had long placed U-869's sinking near the Moroccan coast. No dangers in the mid-Atlantic, but the wreck sitting 60 miles off New Jersey told a completely different story. What's more, the submarine's operational history added to the confusion. U-869 had no recorded victories and conducted a single patrol from December 1944 through February 1945, before disappearing from communications on February 11th, 1945. Until its discovery in 1991, historians assumed that it was lost far from America as shores based on wartime shipping reports and battle claims. The diver investigators, including John Chatterton, Richie Kohler, and their team, weren't just exploring a wreck. They were chasing a historical ghost for 6 long years. They dove to dangerous depths, about 230 feet, where decompression limits and cold water made each descent hazardous. Tragically, 3 divers died during this quest, underlining the extreme risk involved in uncovering the truth. Conflicting theories on the submarine's loss. From the beginning, 2 major theories emerged to explain the unusual wreck. Circle-running torpedo theory. Some of the original wreck divers proposed that one of U-869 Schiestia's acoustic T5 torpedoes malfunctioned and circled back, ultimately striking the submarine itself. These acoustic warheads were designed to home on propeller noise, and in rare cases during WWII, such torpedoes did turn back on the firing vessel. The shape and location of certain breaches on the hull led some to see this as evidence of an internal explosion originating from a misfired torpedo. However, this explanation faced major challenges. U-869's wreck shows multiple large breaches, not just a single blast point, and the warhead strike pattern alone doesn't account for all the damage. Analysts noted that more than one hole and extensive hull deformation pointed to external explosions too. Destroyer escort attack theory. Official consensus. The more widely accepted explanation today comes from naval records and post-war analysis. On February 11th, 1945, Browns, 2 U.S. destroyer escorts, USS Howard D. Crowe and USS Coiner, engaged a sonar contact in the western Atlantic and attacked with depth charges and Hedgehog anti-submarine weapons. These weapons are capable of inflicting large, external pressure hull breaches consistent with the kinds of damage seen on U-869's submerged remains. Post-war reassessments of Allied action reports eventually attributed U-869's sinking to this attack, updating historical records to reflect that the submarine was most likely destroyed by American convoy escorts rather than a freak torpedo malfunction. Reconciling the evidence. Today, some historians believe the true cause may involve both factors. An initial torpedo misfire could have alerted escort ships to the submarine AS presence, prompting a depth charge counterattack that then caused her ultimate loss. But because definitive evidence on the wreck's pattern remains incomplete, the debate persists in academic circles. What does remain clear is this: U-869's discovery forced a revision of official WWII naval history, corrected decades of mistaken records, and brought closure to a forgotten crew of 56 men, whose fate had been lost to the Atlantic depths for nearly half a century. The story of U-869's final moments, whether a tragic torpedo error, a fierce destroyer escort attack, or a combination of both, stands as a haunting reminder of the fog of war and the mysteries that still sleep beneath the sea. After decades of mystery, repeated dives, and painstaking detective work, the wreck off New Jersey was conclusively identified as German submarine U-869, a vessel long thought lost far from these waters, with that identity confirmed through unique artifacts, such as a knife engraved with a crew member's name and torpedo mechanism parts, bearing German markings. U-869's true final resting place was finally known. Researchers and historians realized that she never received the orders to change her patrol area, and instead continued operations in the western Atlantic until her loss in February 1945. But the impact of this discovery extended beyond solving a historical puzzle. It reshaped our understanding of WWII submarine warfare and naval record-keeping. For decades, U-869's fate had been inaccurately recorded by both Allied and German sources. placing her sinking near the Moroccan coast or mid-Atlantic areas based on post-war reports that were ultimately incorrect. The discovery off New Jersey forced a revision of official naval history, showing that U-869 was actively operating much closer to the United States than previously believed. This insight highlights just how chaotic and uncertain submarine warfare could be, even in a conflict as heavily documented as World War II. In the decades since the wreck's identification, U-869 has become more than a dive site. It has become a symbol of unanswered questions and the depths of war's hidden truths. Sport divers and historians alike regard it as one of the most remarkable and haunting wrecks in the world, both for its historical significance and the perilous diving conditions that claimed the lives of 3 divers in pursuit of its story. Documentaries such as Nova, Hitler, Lost Sub, and the best-selling book Shadow Divers have brought the tale of U-869 to a wide audience, using the wreck's human stories and the divers' personal sacrifices to illustrate the intersection of history, mystery, and discovery. Today, U-869 is treated with the respect owed to a war grave. Her story reminds us that even as the battles of World War II faded from living memory, the ocean still preserves secrets, silent witnesses to courage, tragedy, and the fog of war that survives long after the guns fall silent.